Ago, my 16-year-old son, Ohm, was murdered by his father on Mother's Day weekend during court-ordered parent time. Ohm was brutally shot twice in the back and once in the face by a .45 caliber handgun bought from a pawn shop on the same state street in Salt Lake City as the courthouse where I fought in family courts for 14 years, trying to keep my children safe. I supplied the courts with extensive evidence of domestic violence and child abuse, but nevertheless, the court granted custody of Ohm to his abusive father. This morning, it is my impossible task to represent thousands of protective parents and children who share their own but similar experiences, living in violence, and who are not safe to speak out because they will be abused tonight, tomorrow, and this weekend. I mothered in violence for the entirety of Ohm's 17 years. I never dreamed I'd be safe enough to speak the truth publicly, but my son stood in the face of lethal danger and freed me. I'm no longer harassed and hunted, and so I am here before you today. Ohm was conceived in the violence of rape and murdered as a hostage in the violence of control. Despite years of begging for relief, he was powerless to escape, trapped in childhood, and ultimately killed by his custodial parent. Throughout litigation, starting at 5 years old, Ohm asked me, "Mom, when did the kids get to talk?" The court never did hear directly from either of my children. His father was always abusive. I was in my late 20s in a graduate program, and I'm not sure during which of the countless rapes Ohm was conceived. But when I was dropped off to Planned Parenthood with an ultimatum between an abortion or my life, I kept my pregnancy and I chose Ohm, and our life as prisoners began. His father was a 6'3" PhD psychologist. In public, his professional appearance and title made him seem like the model parent, but in private, he perpetuated a lifetime of relentless, systematic sexual assault, psychological, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse of our children, and drug experimentation with them. Calculated coercive control of all of us. This facade is a common abuse practice, but many court professionals have a cursory understanding and little training about how abusers operate. As a result, power and control tactics by the abuser are mislabeled as high conflict parenting. Attorneys for the abusers often mischaracterize the evidence, and psychology evaluators are often unprepared to properly provide evidence on domestic violence and mislead the court and leverage the protective parent's credibility deficit, labeling protective behaviors as hysterical or alienating. This was the primary reason that Ohm was taken from me, and this is happening to thousands of people desperate to protect their children in family court. While court professionals forced me to cooperate with our abuser at home, I did everything I could to protect my children from abuse, but there was no escape from volatile tirades. He would throw Ohm as a toddler into the back seat and drive drunk, trying to push me out on I-15 while speeding down that freeway. I had no reproductive choice. He prohibited contraception. Towering over us, he would declare, "I own you," as if we were his property, and "You'll never survive without me." We were under constant surveillance, stalked, and required to report every action. I wasn't allowed to work. The threats to kill me and take the children escalated, and I moved out. Became homeless with a baby and a preschooler. We lived in basements, above garages, or out of a car, isolated without money and options, and convinced that I was rejected by my family and friends. I reluctantly forfeited my pro se protective order and moved back. To maintain control, he cut all financial resources and frequently kidnapped Ohm and his sister. I finally decided to leave for good when I found his old journal stating that he was a sex addict and a child molester, and afraid he would do it even to his own children. Thinking the court system would protect us, I scraped together a retainer for an attorney who told me that no matter what abuse evidence I presented, the family court system would still be a gamble. I was then denied a protective order. With unsupervised parent time granted to him by the court, his arrogance skyrocketed to unrestrained child sexual abuse, even during a custody evaluation. When Ohm and his sister disclosed to several, including recorded interviews at children's justice centers, I was ordered to restrict all contact with their father, or I'd be considered complicit in the abuse. The domestic violence detective said that they believed the kids, but the prosecutor doubted the ability to win because Dad was too smart and the kids were too young. Then in family court, I was told to stop reporting the abuse later, that I would be jailed if I didn't return to unsupervised parent time with extra overnights to make up for his loss. Nothing is more terrifying than sending your children to someone you know is abusing them, with the system enabling. Protective parents are often in a double bind, blamed for not protecting and suspected and blamed for reporting abuse, yet forced to co-parent. People ask, why don't victims just leave? It's not that simple. I face the impossible choice between living with my children under the crushing weight of perpetual violence or pursuing divorce and a life of co-parenting with an abuser, with police, with child protective services, and with court evaluators. If I had known how easy it was to evade court orders, that the system would not help me protect my children, I would have stayed in the abuse, but I'm confident I would not be alive to testify today. I always expected that he would kill me first. I thought that I had escaped, only to become entangled in the complexity of expensive forced evaluations with experts who demonstrated no experience or expertise with domestic violence, yet whose opinions would determine the trajectory of our lives. I was warned by attorneys never to call Child Protective Services and never to tell the real truth or risk losing custody. I was the first line of defense for my children, yet I was seen as the problem by many court professionals. Every type of court-ordered therapy and intervention failed for us. Despite my children's countless pleadings to live safely with me, we were sent to reunification therapy with a cash-only parent coordinator who has actively participated in opposing this bill. As a psychologist, she aligned with the children's psychologist's father, writing lengthy, outrageous letters to the clerk, blaming me for the children's resistance to contact with him and telling my children to stop asking for what they wanted because it would never happen. I often had to choose between buying groceries or paying installments to a long line of court-ordered professional evaluators, adding up to tens of thousands of dollars. There was nothing therapeutic about forced reunification with him, but in the court's view, I needed to cooperate or I would be held in contempt. No, not one evaluator or appointed expert petitioned to remove the children from abuse, to protect them, no matter how many disclosures or how obvious their symptoms of trauma. Family court may appear as small claims court, but it maintains the highest stakes claims. Our children deserve free to live from abuse, not to be treated as property to be divided. He continued to use the court systems in his personal hammer for many years. Ohm's childhood is not documented in photo albums, but in reams of a 14-year court docket. Our second custody evaluation resulted in the most important legal proceeding of our case, when experts summarized reports of excessive DEA prescription records, solicitation arrest, police investigation of drug-induced rape, harassment, and stalking. Yet out of fear of being sued by him, evaluators recommended that my children would be split from each other, and custody of Ohm was taken from me and given to his dad. If he was dangerous to one of them, he was dangerous to both. I stated on record, "You're telling me I have to sacrifice my son to save my daughter." Over a year later, the third evaluation was filed without warning, finally granting custody to me. No one let me know, even though I knew the abuser better than anyone, and I never saw Ohm again. 3 weeks later, he was dead. The more I tried to protect, the more I was accused of lying and alienation until my child was murdered. Even with all the protracted abuse and allegations, I was never able to get a court finding of abuse. Our case was littered with over a decade of court-ordered experts, yet after tens of thousands of dollars, thousands of data points, and following the letter of the law in every order, I was accused as a high-conflict parent. What happened to Ohm will happen again if we do not raise our standards and fix our custody laws. Ohm's law is an opportunity for us to create system change for Utah's children, to do right by them, and save parents. Many are trapped in abuse and trapped in family court right now as I am speaking. In closing, I ask, what more must a child say to be heard? What must a protective parent do to overcome the credibility deficit? How many more children must sacrifice their childhood before we take action? How will we show the nation that Utah does prioritize the child first and always? Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today.